Segurou, né? Puxa aqui. Ajeita o pé aí atrás. Isso. 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 Aí outro lado. Ajeita o pé. Um, dois, três, quatro, cinco, seis. Aí na frente. Vamos soltar. Aí, braço. Vai, puxa. 1, 2, 10 segundos. 3, vai pra frente. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Fazer não, né? Tá bom? Levanta a perna agora. Aí. 1, 2, 3. Pro lado. 1, 2, 3. Vira de lado. Aí. 1, 2, 3. Outro lado. Isso. Aí. 1, 2, 3. Aí a gente espera, a gente cumprimenta. Mais aqui dentro.
I'm going to talk a little bit about a fighter's stance. It is important to divide your body. Don't put too much weight on your front leg, and don't put too much weight on your back leg. You want your center of gravity and weight to be right between your legs. It has to be in the middle. When it comes to your guard, you have a little more leeway. If your opponent is outside of striking range, you can keep your hands a little lower. But if he moves into striking range, you want to elevate your arms because there is more danger. And when you elevate your arms, it is important to tighten your stomach for protection. Now from the side. When you establish your stance, you can keep your heel flat on the mat, or you can elevate it off the mat. Both work. The important part is that you stay centered. You don't want to lean too far backward, and you don't want to lean too far forward. If you lean too far forward, it makes it very difficult to retreat or attack. For the ultimate mobility, you must maintain an even base. When you do this, you can punch or kick whenever you see an opening. When in competition, a lot of fighters will put their center of gravity forward. But in my style, we place our center of gravity in the middle because it provides a great amount of distance between my opponent and me. If I lean forward, my opponent can throw a punch and hit me very easily. Now, if I place my center of gravity in the middle, my opponent can no longer punch me. Again, if I put my weight forward, I have sacrificed my defenses. That is why you don't want to fight leaning forward. It becomes so easy for your opponent to hit you. If I keep my center of gravity in the middle, my opponent will have to move forward in order to hit me. This is very important. You always need to maintain that distance. Never put your face in the line of fire. Centering your weight between your legs also allows you to kick and strike with ease. Adopting and getting comfortable with the proper stance is very important in both karate and fighting. Now I'm going to show some basic footwork that can be used in combat. First, forward movement. Every time I move forward, I move the front leg first. For example, if my left leg is forward, I'm going to step with my left leg first. The most important thing is that you don't cross your legs. If you cross your legs, your opponent will see you are vulnerable and strike, causing you to lose balance and fall over. You never want to cross your legs unconsciously. You can cross your legs, but it must be a conscious movement and done at the right moment. It has to be done for a specific reason, to accomplish a particular goal. Same thing, your base always has to be balanced, your center of gravity between your legs. When you do this, you can move forward, backward, lateral, lateral, front, back, lateral, lateral. It all comes very easy. You always have to track your opponent's movement. Always maintain that distance. When he makes a movement, I make a counter movement. It is very important to always react to your opponent's movement and keep the fight on your terms. Now I show Tai Sakbaiki, or footwork techniques. The first movement is the outside pivot. This technique is important because it not only allows you to avoid an opponent's straight attack, but it also puts you in a position from which to launch a counterattack.
Sempre você tem que se colocar em posição de contragolpe. Você faz o pivô, mas
Once you do the pivot like this,
faz o pivô,
you can throw a strike.
aqui você pode fazer golpe, outro golpe. Mas esse pivô,
However, it is very important that you don't lean back as you pivot.
ficar nessa postura.
You want to keep your original stance, keep your center of gravity between your legs.
Postura, você não pode, você tem que se manter na postura.
As long as you do this, you'll be placed into an excellent position to counter.
Você está. Faz o pivô.
Now from the side.
Lado lateral aqui.
As I pivot, I maintain my original stance, putting me in a perfect spot to launch a counterattack.
Aqui eu posso contra-ataque. Qualquer golpe. Mesma coisa aqui, ó. Desse lado,
Here I do the same outside pivot from the opposite side.
tem outro ângulo de visão. Aí. Ó.
Continuing with Tai Sakbaiki, I show how to avoid an opponent's linear attack by switching your stance. Here I begin with my left foot forward.
No mesmo lugar. Por exemplo, estou aqui.
Notice how my center of gravity is still in the center.
A parte do centro,
Again, this is super important because I do not need to shift my weight forward or backward to employ
às
movement,
vezes mostra o movimento.
which prevents me from telegraphing my actions.
Vamos aqui então. Vou mostrar essa saída. Essa saída ela é muito importante.
This escape is very important because it allows you to change your stance.
Saída trocando de perna. E você
I start with my left foot forward, but after executing the counter, I have my right foot forward.
mais uma vez.
The opposite side.
Trocando de perna.
In order to make use of this counter, it is very important that you feel comfortable from both the standard stance and a southpaw stance.
Vou contra-atacar com a
If you haven't mastered both stances, then it will be hard to make the most out of this technique and others like it.
fazer isso,
Your
dominar.
counterattacks will be more limited.
Mais uma vez.
When you counter, you can do so with either a kick or punch.
Posicional.
The most important thing is that you switch your stance and escape your leg. This is another excellent technique for avoiding an opponent's strike and then countering with a strike of your own. The most important thing here is the leg escape. Now I demonstrate how to do a two-pivot movement. From your fighting stance, you first execute the pivot we just covered. After the first pivot, your opponent continues to attack, and you execute a second pivot to again evade his strike. This second pivot is a little more complicated. It demands a little technique.
Técnica.
But if you dedicate time to practicing it, you'll begin to use it with ease. One pivot, now the second pivot. The counterattack is optional.
É opcional.
You can escape and then attack with a punch or kick, but the most important part is to execute both pivots and evade your opponent's relentless attack. Just as with the previous technique, you're going to end up with your opposite leg forward. I started with my left foot forward, and I ended after both pivots with my right leg forward. Although this might be a little hard to manage when first starting out, utilizing movements such as these will confuse your opponent. No matter how hard he attacks, he won't be able to find you because you're always one step ahead, always cutting angles. Two pivots in the counterattack. One more time. A little more loose now, a little quicker. Now I demonstrate how to take two backward steps and then execute a pivot, a combination of movements that comes in handy against an advancing opponent. As always, you want to have correct posture and a strong base. You want your guard to be up for protection. Now when you take each step backward, you want to combine it with a strike to prevent your opponent from overrunning you. That strike will help you maintain distance and slow your opponent's advance. So you take one step, another step, and then pivot. One more time. 1, 2, pivot. You never want to take more than 2 steps backward. 2 steps is your limit. Always one step, your second step, pivot. This is to maintain distance and prevent my opponent from rushing forward. It's meant to slow his attack. After executing the pivot, you can counter with a punch or kick. Simple movements. Notice how as I step back, I strike with my lead arm. Now I will do it a little quicker, as if I were fighting. This technique is very similar to the previous one in that you take 2 steps backward and then pivot. However, with this technique, you pivot on your rear leg, which takes you in the opposite direction and reverses your stance. 2 steps back and then pivot in the opposite direction. So, 1, 2, pivot.
Dois steps, saindo.
So you take 2 steps and then you exit to the opposite side. Now I will show you a little faster. Now I'll show you a simple movement that you can use to close the distance between you and your opponent. Normally when you move, you step the foot that is closest to the direction that you want to head. For example, if you want to go forward, you step first with your lead foot. If you want to move back, you step first with your back foot. If you want to move to the right, you step your right foot first, and if you want to move to the left, you step your left foot first. However, with this technique you break that rule, but you do so with a specific goal in mind, which is to close the distance without telegraphing your movement. You are conscious of your actions. So I step my rear foot up to my lead foot, and then I push off my rear foot to shoot